Hello, class. And in this lecture, I want to talk to you about maybe another method of Bible study you could consider as you're working through text, as you're working through different parts of Scripture. I'm going to just simply entitle this lecture, Follow the Verbs. I'm going to illustrate it with a pretty particular and familiar verse. Those of you who are familiar with California and some of the western states would recognize we have a restaurant out here called In and Out. And they are basically a simple menu, burgers, fries, shakes, drinks, and that's about it. But on the bottom of their cups, they usually have Bible verses, the reference at least spelled out. And so one of them you'll find on one of the references is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And so the verse says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Most of us have heard that verse. Now we're maybe sharing a devotional thought. We need to maybe preach a passage from Proverbs or whatever. How do we try to get to the meaning of this verse? What's another way to study this besides some of the methods we've looked at already this semester and this term? And so let's talk about following the verbs. And so I'm going to look at this verse, and I just want to highlight where the verbs are. Then I'm going to erase this very quickly. I'm going to draw a little bit of a diagram for you, and I'm going to show you how this verse can come alive to us by simply just following the verbs. So the first verb for us, trust. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean, and I'm going to sort of put lean not together just because they go together for the meaning. Lean not in thine own understanding in all thy ways. Acknowledge him, and then he shall direct thy paths. These are the verbs, okay? Now let's look at these verbs, and you'll notice trust, lean, acknowledge are all imperatives. They're all commands. This comes from my observation. What do these verbs have in common? Trust, lean, acknowledge. This verb is different. These three verbs are something that's related to me. This verb is something related to him. All right, so keep that in the back of your mind. And let's work our way through this text with a little bit of not a diagram like you would do maybe in English class. I don't think your English teacher is going to appreciate this diagram, but a diagram at least to help me view the scriptures in a way that causes it to come alive and helps me to see connections. That's really what we're wanting to do, is make connections. We want to understand how this verse fits together and how I'm supposed to interpret it. So I'm going to draw a line sort of closer to the left-hand side of my paper. And up against this line is where I'm going to put my verbs. Trust, lean not. I'm going to put the not with it. And then acknowledge. And then shall direct over here. I'll show you why in just a moment. The primary reason is because that verb is related to a second character in the verse. Okay? So trust, now let me fill in the rest of this verse. What is associated with trust? Well, I'm to trust in the Lord. It's right there in the text. I'm to trust with all my heart. So that verb trust, governing it, or sort of orbiting, if you will, is the phrase, prepositional phrases, and the Lord with all thy heart. How do I trust the Lord? With all my heart. Where do I put my trust? In the Lord. So there's a where and there's a how. Lean not unto thine own understanding. I'm trusting him, not me. So the verse is sort of telling me two sides of the same thing. I'm to acknowledge him. That's what it says. How am I to acknowledge him? I'm to acknowledge him in all my ways. In all thy ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So just looking at this with simply following the verbs, an outline sort of comes off the page to me. Now, it's not alliterated. It doesn't have a fancy, everything starts with the same letter. It's not that. But it is a simple outline that comes right from the text. And sometimes, well, maybe all the times, if it's right from the text, it's hard to get much better than that, okay? So here's what I find. What's the big idea of this verse? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not on understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, he shall direct thy paths. What's the big idea from the book of Proverbs, which is about wisdom for life, is how do you have God direct your paths? That's the big idea. And this verse gives me 3 steps. If I will do these 3 things, he will do that. And so the verse teaches itself. And all we did was use powers of observation. We followed the verbs, and we just saw the connections in the one verse. So what if I'm teaching this to someone? It might be something like this. 3 steps for finding direction in your new year. 3 principles for finding God's will for your life. They're general principles. They're not specific, but they're general principles. For example, principle number 1, you have to trust the Lord. Principle number 2, you can't trust yourself. Principle number 3, you have to acknowledge, you have to respect, you have to recognize the power of God in everything you do. And when you're trusting him and not yourself and putting him as the preeminent one in your life, here's what God allows to happen in your life. He will direct your paths. Well, it's a simple verse, and you can do that with many verses and throughout the Bible. It's just another tool. It may not work in every verse. That's fine. Not every tool works in every situation. I think we understand that just from even the physical world. But it is another tool to just put into the tool belt, and hopefully you'll see how simple it works. I call it follow the verbs. Hope that helps you as you work through studying the Bible on your own.